Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Productions channel here at YouTube, and welcome to, of course, another episode of Album of the Week. This is episode number 230. And today I am diving straight into the self-titled debut album from 220 Volt, originally released back in May 30th, 1983 via Epic Records. Of course, what you see on my hands is the 2018 CD reissue from Music on CD. So without further ado, let's begin. Back in the 70s, Sweden hadn't quite caught the heavy rock and roll bug, or at all much of Scandinavia, like Germany, Australia, and Japan did. But besides some prog rock bands that were found in these Nordic states, the only bands people knew that were from Sweden that were at all making any sort of splash was either Blue Swede, though these days, no thanks to, of course, the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, though Quentin Tarantino used the song first. And, of course, ABBA. But things were beginning to change. Due to the ongoing rise of such bands like Black Sabbath, UFO, Deep Purple, Queen, Thin Lizzy, Scorpions, Uriah Heep, Budgie, and of course, Judas Priest. Sweden were slowly catching on. By 1976, one of the first bands to mark this shift was the formation of Heavy Load, who would first go on to fire the first shot by releasing their debut album in 1978 titled Full Speed at High Level, which came through the Heavy Sounds label, which had released a couple of things by Murasaki and even the Canadian band Goddo's first album. Then by 1979, a few other bands would form: Black Widow, Force, and 220 Volt. By 1980, Black Widow would eventually change their name to Torch, and by 1982, Force would change their name to Europe. But 220 Volt would stay as is. The first lineup for 220 Volt consisted of Thomas Driven, Mats Karlsson, Tommy Hillstrom, Pelle Henson, and Christer Nas, who would also be credited under the name of Christer Essel. This lineup would see a few changes over the course of 3 years before releasing anything. In 1980, Tommy Hillstrom would leave and be replaced by Mike Krusenberg, who would of course go over the name of Michael Larsson. Then by 1982, Pelle Henson would leave and be replaced by Peter Hermansson. With the lineup of Thomas Dreven and Mats Karlsson on guitars and backing vocals, Michael Larsson on bass, Peter Hermansson on drums, and Christer Nas on vocals, they would then record 2 demos in 1982, which would then lead into releasing their very first release, being the 7-inch 45 Prisoner of War, backed by the track Sauron through their short-lived Gunson's record label. A very cool release, with the B-side track Sauron being the true highlight of that single. By 1983, the band would see one more lineup change. Their vocalist, Chrysler Nas, would leave the band and soon be replaced by Jockey Lonhorn, hope I pronounced that correctly, who would add in a more smoother touch than compared to the loud, high register that Chrysler had. With the now definitive lineup in place, they were now signed to their first big record label deal, Epic Records. The band would travel to the Stockholm recording studios to record their debut full-length album, which would be self-titled. With Thomas Witt serving as producer and Thomas Lundqvist serving as both engineer and mixer, and Simon Runge serving as assistant engineer. With laying down 9 songs, everything would be ready for the final stages, with being mastered by Peter Dahl. Once everything was finished, it would then be released on May 30th, 1983. So, featuring 9 tracks, clocking at the length of 39 minutes, 18 seconds, these 9 tracks are, of course, starting off with Lonely Nights, No Return, The End of the World, Gypsy Queen, Night Winds, Child of the Night, Stop and Look Back, Prisoner of War, and then finally ending with Woman in White. From the cheesy yet effective cover art, what's packed inside this album are 9 tracks of top-notch, sharply edged, galloping driven heavy metal, the way the Swedes knew how to do it. From the opening track, Lonely Nights, I can't help but be mesmerized by this power to convey such epic-like melodies, harmonies, and razor-sharp structures that is just found throughout this entire record. Since owning this album for like 3 years now, and initially getting it alongside their second album here, Power Games, between the two, Power Games right here was the one that was getting the most play. Now, when I first was listening to this album here, the debut, I was admiring it, but nothing was quite clicking with me in a way I felt with Power Games. But over time, it has been slowly creeping up on me. And since, of course, we're listening to this album just a couple days ago, in preparation for this episode, it finally clicked. Even marking out certain things that were finally jumping out at me that just didn't when I was first listening to this album. And I will let you know on what things were, and you'll find out here soon enough. Now this album, for the most part, is rockin', like with the opening track Lonely Nights, which shows quite a bit of UFO influence. But once you get to the chorus, is where you get that Nordic regional feeling, with those backing vocal harmonies and metallic melodies, all brought together by the infectious twin guitar duo of Drevin and Carlson. But once it heads into No Return, is where I feel that Swedish magic becomes more felt. It has a rocking structure, but what's packed in this song is what gives this its magic. I was beginning to make out Mike Larsson's bass playing. He provides some nice bass notes. Then there is the chorus part, where it tends to get slowed down, with adding in some acoustic guitar parts to make this song seem more grandeur-like. Then of course, once we get to the solo part, it just lets loose and seals this song for me. Then we get to The End of the World, which is much slower in pace, which reminds me of what Heavy Load were doing around this time. It's a heavy stomper that is peppered with those great lead solos from both Drevin and Carlson. Again, some more cool bass notes from Larsson, and of course, Jockey Lundholm's vocals, which soar through in this entire song, making it another highlight for me. Then we have Gypsy Queen, which is big and grand, reminding me of classic Scorpions, especially with the chorus, and with those epic dual guitar harmonies, making this another cool kick-ass song. Then we have what I think is the most unique song here, and that is the sort of power ballad, Night Winds. This time we see a female singer whose name is Jenny Lundqvist. For the most part, she sings alongside Jacques Lundholm, and both provide sweet vocal harmonies. But what also makes this song stand out to me is with the use of organs, which are provided by K. Soderstrom. It gives this song its epic feel, maybe reminding me of such heavyweights like Uriah Heep, but it does contain this prog-like element as well, just like what you got from early Uriah Heep, making a cool-off track before preparing for the final four bangers. So then we finally get into Child of the Night, which is pretty much a breathtaking speed metal song, which just slices right through without leaving no air to breathe, featuring more of that dual guitar attack, and drummer Peter Hermansen just lets loose like a savage animal, making this song a force to be reckoned with. Then things get back to a normal pace with Stop and Look Back, another galloping rocker that features some sort of interesting slap-like bass notes from Mike Larson, which is why this particular song sticks out at me. But overall, it's another anthemic rocker with great harmonized guitar leads and more soaring vocals. Then we have the updated version of Prisoner of War. I kinda like this version maybe more than the original one with Chrysler Nas, but I still think Sauron was the best from that single. But this is still a cool song nonetheless, and does compact that grand epic feel that most of the Swedish metal bands has. Then finally the album ends with Woman in White, another fast song here, but not as jugular ripping as Child of the Night, but still cool. This has a classic rock vibe, very much in the rainbow side of things. If I could compare this song to something else, it would actually be Stories from the Old Days by Universe, another Swedish metal band. There is a part in this song where it slows down to an infectious part where the leads just let loose, which gives this song some extra needed power, even of course giving me those great classic goosebumps. Just ending the album on a strong note. 220 Volt's debut is a good album, though probably not their greatest effort, but a solid enough starting effort for them. Once they got into Power Games, and then soon after that with Mind Over Muscle, they were looking to be a very promising Swedish metal band that I felt was giving a band like Europe a run for their money. But just like Europe, who would go on to do bigger things by updating their style, 220 Volt caught wind of that and would also change their style to chase after what Europe were getting, thus leaving behind their metal roots. Still, at least we have the first 3 albums of when they were a straight-ahead heavy metal band, with this debut being one of their first in their dab into metal. So, with this now being 40 years old, if you're one of those who grew up with this album, you know what to do. But if you're one of those who have been familiar with this album for years, and if you have any thoughts, whether they are positive or negative, you can leave them all in the comment section below. But if you're one of those who may have not been that familiar with 220 Volt and are curious about where to start with, and if you're just familiar with, let's say, bands like Europe to begin with that are from Sweden, that are, again, the more bigger Swedish sort of rock bands, then obviously you definitely should check out 220 volt. And if it is that much of a curiosity for you to even dive in further into the realms of a Swedish metal to begin with, then I'm obviously going to direct you to, of course, the heavyweights. That being Heavy Load, Overdrive, Torch, and even, of course, I'll throw an Axe Switch, and 220 volt. So, with that all said, this is Heavy Thrasher saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone. Well, since this was the very first Album of the Week episode where I put a lot of work into, I just hope that this at least turns out to being at least a success.